Wrapping up here on Take Command, our guest today, of course, Pro Football Focus's Trevor Sikkema. So the Drake Maye, Jayden Daniels discussion is one that is never going to die, much to, I think, all of our chagrin. But it's the kind of thing that we'll be monitoring for the rest of their careers, obviously. But I think from a draft perspective, it's really interesting to watch Drake Maye be the, not universal, but the favorite amongst, whether it's you, Nate Tice, like Mina. There's so many smart NFL people that look at this and are like, it's obviously Drake Maye QB2. And then the more and more reporting that comes out about how the league feels, like our buddy John Kine from ESPN obviously did a lot of reporting on this as the Commanders ultimately draft Daniels. And John's like, everybody I talked to, they said Daniels was QB2. You got people like Louis Riddick, who used to work in the league, saying that actually for Louis, he was QB1. Where do you think the disconnect is in kind of the way you see it and the way so many in the league seem to see it? And why do you think, and Logan, you ended on Daniels as QB2 as well, or right there with McCarthy. We both had them as kind of 2A, 2B almost, if you will. So like, where do we think that this disconnect is? What are the factors that maybe the NFL weighs heavier than you do? And Trevor, I'd be curious as kind of we get through this conversation here, if that affects how you look at quarterback at all moving forward.
Yeah. So look, I think the way that I would describe the difference between kind of how maybe draft Twitter, social media saw Maye versus Daniels, and the reason why the NFL liked Daniels a lot better is because I think Daniels is more repeatable right now, right? He's much more consistent. I think Daniels had the best fundamentals of any quarterback in this class. I think that people look at him and they go, "Oh, running quarterback, yeah, but he need to be more consistent, right?" It's like the stereotype, like, "Oh, if they're a rushing quarterback, they're not really consistent as a pocket passer or anything like that." I think that Daniels is incredibly fast, and obviously we've seen that a lot. But I also think he's got very good fundamentals. I mean, from his footwork all the way through his throwing motion, it is very repeatable. You know what you are getting every time. And I think the NFL absolutely loves that. So they go, okay, you already have the muscle memory down. Now I just need to teach you where to look and when. And I think that to NFL coaches seems to be an easier talking point or selling point of, oh, I can work with this player. Whereas Drake Maye, if you ask me, better arm talent, more diverse thrower. I mean, he is somebody who can layer throws at every single level, whether you're talking about vertical thirds or whether you're talking about horizontal thirds. I mean, any combination of them. I think Drake Maye has showcased the ability and the success level to hit all sorts of throws against all sorts of coverages at any point in the field. And I think he could do so with really good velocity, better velocity than Jayden Daniels. But the footwork, the fundamentals sometimes escape Maye. And I think that makes teams nervous. Like if we have to change how a guy is throwing versus what we've seen in college, well, like how much is that going to stick? Is it going to be consistent? And I think that kind of makes teams a little bit nervous because I think the big detractor from Drake Maye, especially this past season, was he just misses. Like he just misses some throws. He kind of, he kind of made some decisions that he'd like to have back, but man, I mean, he's still a young gunslinger quarterback. I feel like that part of it was getting a little bit overblown. But the accuracy, just the missed throws, and you just go, man, like, why did you miss that? There was no real need to miss that throw. I think really frustrates teams. And where you look at Daniels, there just aren't there. There's not a lot of that. I mean, sure, he could speed up his process as well, but when Daniel sees it well, I mean, it's a beautiful step drop. He is fully balanced. The feet are light. He can move directions very easily. He can put his foot in the ground. And like I said, he can generate a ton of power from that back foot. The feet are married up with the shoulders and exactly where the ball is going. The follow through is beautiful. Like it is all there for Daniels. That part of his game is so repeatable. It is so clean. You don't have to worry about it. So that paired with the rushing ability that he has, although of course, we could talk about the fact that he needs to protect himself a lot better when actually taking off the football. That to me is where I think the NFL is just, they prioritize that part of it more than maybe we do on the outside, because we're not the ones that are necessarily coaching them. We're sitting here saying like, okay, but look at what Drake did in 2022. You've got to believe that you can get something in the middle as a starting point and then make him even better in the NFL. And when you do that, in my opinion, Drake Maye's arm is significantly feels too strong of a word, but like it's better than Daniels. I think Maye has higher arm talent than Daniels does. I think Daniels has an adequate arm for the NFL level, and he can hit NFL throws, but it's not quite what Caleb's was. It's not quite what Drake's is. It's not quite what even like McCarthy's is and Penix, right? I mean, I think it's closer to, I think Daniels is closer to Bo Nix than any of those guys that I mentioned before. But you don't really think about that a ton because his fundamentals are so clean that he maximizes his arm basically on every single throw. So it doesn't look like he's really like forcing it or anything like that. It still looks smooth. So those are kind of the things that come to my head when I think of, all right, well, why was the NFL higher on Daniels than Maye? And look, maybe it's also like some interview things, right? I mean, like that's a big part of the process. And I'm not saying like Drake's not a good dude. I've had the opportunity to sit down and interview Drake Maye. I had a great time getting to know him and chatting with him and all that. So my experience with him was great. Anytime I've seen him on like a podcast or anything like that, or at the combine or whatever, he seemed great. But sometimes that can go into it too. Sometimes it's just a little bit of that competitive edge. Maybe the teams that interviewed Daniels maybe believe in him more, believe in that fire competitiveness, and maybe that's all the edge that you need. And then word starts getting out with the insiders and people is like, oh yeah, Jayden Daniels is the guy. He's gonna make it. He's gonna pan out amongst these other quarterbacks. So maybe that goes into it a little bit too. But in terms of overall arm talent, I lean Maye pretty easily, and that's why I ended up with him at QB2.
So the thing I wanted to ask you about, to kind of follow up, obviously I agree, like the repeatability of his drop, Jayden Daniels, I think is 100% right. Like just the fundamentals are there. The two things that I kind of noticed or just wanted to call to your attention and get your thoughts on are his improvement over his college career, Jayden Daniels, and then also his eye discipline. His eye discipline to me just seemed to be significantly better than Drake's. And like when I look at quarterbacks in the NFL level, at the NFL level, like they have really good eye discipline. And it's one of the reasons that I ended up really liking JJ. I thought he did a great job of understanding what the defense was presenting and then manipulating it using his body position and his eyes. And again, like the LSU offense was very simple. So in terms of like, you know, what they were getting on a down and down basis, it wasn't like he was doing like brain surgery, but he was always very disciplined with his eyes. And I just want to get your thoughts on that, and if you thought that was part of like why he moved ahead of Drake in the NFL's eyes.
I do, and this is a really good point to bring up because I think that answering those two questions are sort of one and the same. I do love Jayden Daniels' sort of path to get to this point, right? You think about him as a quarterback at Arizona State. He was basically just one read, vertical, deep shot toward type of a player, or he's going to take off and run. So his time as a starter at Arizona State, he was really just winning off of being a really good athlete and having a pretty good arm. He really wasn't like taking care of the football super well, going through progressions, anything like that. He transfers over to LSU, and you can really tell. I haven't heard him say this, but this is what I think just because of how much he dedicated himself to this. I think you can tell that he went, all right, I got out of Arizona State. I transferred to the SEC. If I don't take care of the football, I'm not going to last in this league. And if I have to transfer again, like that might be it. Like you can tell how much care and attention he put into becoming a better quarterback when it came to making decisions, taking care of the football in 2022. And he had one of the lowest turnover-worthy play rates in the country because of it. Now, the big-time throws were down. The average depth of target was down. He just wasn't taking as many chances. But that turnover, I mean, he did not turn the ball over in 2022. Now 2023 comes around, and you could tell he kind of says to himself, or him or his offense coordinator, his quarterback coaches, whatever. It's like, okay, you got the tendencies and the eye discipline, which you mentioned, which is a fantastic point. You've got that eye discipline down. You don't have this over-aggressive mentality to put the ball in harm's way. But let's step it up a little bit, right? Let's push the ball down the field a little bit more. Let's get a little bit more big-time throws. Let's get the average depth of target back up. And this past year, obviously, as a Heisman Trophy winner, you saw it was the best of every single world. Now, the turnover-worthy play rate was a little bit higher, naturally, just because of how vertical the offense was. But his big-time throws through the roof compared to 2022. The average depth of target, same thing. And the turnover-worthy plays were still relatively low. Now, you talk about like the sacks taken and that kinds of stuff. He's got to get a lot better at not taking as many sacks and being able to get rid of the football a little bit better. But that's something that you can work on. But to your questions, to your point, that journey that he has had, that linear progression of getting better every single year at tangible things. Like you could point out every single step of where he got better. And it was just they say that like progress isn't always linear. And they say that for people, like kind of going through adversity and, saying like, oh, like you get up when you get knocked down. Daniel's college career is pretty much a linear progression, just going up until we saw him this past year win a Heisman Trophy. So I think it's also very easy for NFL evaluators to just see him get better every single year. And I have said this before, and I do believe this. If you flip-flop Drake's 2022 and 2023 season, I think he's QB2. I think he goes second off the board because his 2022 season was better in the eyes of evaluators than 2023 was. And it was just the fact that it's just funny to me that we act like 2022 doesn't really exist or doesn't count just because 2023 was a little bit more recent. It's like he still did that. Like he still did that a year before. Just the offense was a little bit different this year, and it just wasn't the same year for him and the rest of the team. So I wonder where we're at if Drake Maye's 2022 and 2023 seasons were flipped, even with the progression that Daniels had. I kind of feel as though Maye would have been QB2 at that point, which is, again, what makes this conversation a little bit silly to me. But that's kind of a long answer to your question of Jayden's journey and how it played into how the league saw him, because I think they absolutely loved pointing out different spots where he got better every single year.
Yeah, I think the other thing you said at the end of your first answer too is where I kind of look at this discussion, which is the mental side of it and the leadership and the interviews and all that kind of stuff. And I wonder sometimes if that's smart or if that's too much of like football guys being football guys, where like the data is cold. Right. And the data just says like, this is what happened. And you have to be able to put that data in context. Everyone's got the same numbers. How your ability to interpret them is what makes you good at using the analytics, the numbers, whatever you want to call them, or not. But I do think it's interesting that we talk about so much of the intangibles, the leadership, and I look at a guy like Adam Peters who values that stuff. And I look at him drafting based off the leadership, and a guy like Mike Sanders still, it's like, yeah, he's a little undersized. Yeah, this, but like that dude's the best leader in the draft. That's who we want a Washington Commander to be. And I tend to lean towards like, maybe actually that's the correct way to look at it. That there is something about a projection that you have to understand the person and where they're going. The fact that as Adam said about Jayden and you just talked about, like, it was hard for him. He had to work for it. I do think that stuff matters. And to me, I know, look, moving forward, like I'm going to be trying to look into guys' stories more and kind of understand where they came from as much as, maybe not as much as, but certainly in conjunction with the tape. That to me is like my big takeaway from this process and watching Peters go through this for the first time as an analyst up close. But I'm just curious, Trevor, to kind of double click on that part of it with you, if someone who, obviously with the amount of data you guys have at PFF, that's where you're going to start. You have great access to the tape, and that's kind of where you have made your living doing this, as someone who's really good at looking at the tape and deciphering what's there. But how much has that infiltrated your process the longer that you've done this, of kind of the human element, if you will?
Yeah, it's the ultimate cop-out for me as a draft analyst, and why I can survive for many years after this is, I can look at the tape of a guy and say like, oh, I like him. And if he doesn't work out, be like, there's something I just,
how was I supposed to know that?
I didn't know him. So no, but in all seriousness, like it's a massive piece of the pie. I've said this for years. You draft people as much as you do players, right? I mean, like that, you can evaluate all the tape that you want. You can envision them in certain parts of your scheme. But at the end of the day, a player's toughness, competitiveness, work ethic, leadership, like those are genuinely all things that hold the key. Like and when you talk about like, oh, coaches are putting them in a good situation or these kinds of things, it is simply to make these human beings more confident or believe in themselves, to maximize whatever talent that they have. That is the ultimate wild card of every single, puzzle that you put together when it comes to the picture that you are building of a prospect and how they're going to fit, and the scouting report that you have is the player aspect of it. And it's massive. It's why teams spend so much time at the Shrine Bowl or the Senior Bowl or the Combine or those individual, well, not for the Commanders individual, more of a group thing when it comes to those interviews and visits that you have trying to get to know these guys and what makes them tick. I mean, you hear stories in the past of like, oh, this guy was going to draft this player number 1 overall. Like I don't know. I don't know if this actually happened or if it was just kind of like urban legend at this point. But like when the Bucs, I remember, had the first overall pick in 2015, and it was Jameis Winston or Marcus Mariota. Like I heard people say, "Oh, the Bucs staff like went to the janitor of Jameis Winston's high school and asked, like, okay, like, who was he? You know, like, who was he when he wasn't this big star and ESPN wasn't watching and all this kinds of stuff." And it's like, those are the things where you go to these great lengths simply to see who people are. And it's because you want to see what their confidence level is like within themselves, whether they believe in themselves, that competitiveness, that toughness. I mean, those are words that you just continue to hear every single time that you ask a coach. I cannot tell you how many times this has happened at the combine. You get up there and an offensive coordinator, a head coach, or whoever it is, and you go, you know, what are some qualities that you look for in a defensive lineman, you know, knowing that, okay, they're probably going to draft a defensive lineman at some point in the draft. A lot of them, before they even get into any skill set, will say something like, well, qualities that you look for in an NFL player that we want on our team are, you want him to be a fierce competitor. You know, you want him to be tough. You want him to be somebody with a good work ethic that can push themselves. And at the end of the day, like, that's what matters most. We can sit here and we can talk about bend and explosiveness and arm length and all that kinds of stuff. But if you don't have the drive to be the best that you can be, then sometimes players with less talent actually end up performing better. And I think that's just that's a case of sports in general, and why the people part of scouting these guys is so important.
No doubt. And if people want more insight into the depths that teams go to find out stuff, like your high school janitor story, our friend Jordan Roderick, who writes for The Athletic, did this series where she was basically embedded with some of the Rams scouting department for 10 months. It's called Finding Rams. It's on The Athletic. It is incredible reporting, and some of the stuff that the Rams do throughout their process is pretty fascinating. And I'm sure a lot of other teams do similar stuff. So I would say if your interest is piqued on the janitor story, go check out Jordan's work. Of course, a former guest on the show as well, in The Athletic. Trevor, this was great, dude. Always appreciate you. Thanks so much for the time. And if you have any wacky football bits that you want to do over the summer, just let us know, because we got nothing but time between now and training camp.
That sounds good. That's basically what we do on my podcast as well. So might need a little bit of a crossover, a bleed over, something like that, just so we can survive until August.
Done. That's half the work for twice the shows. I'd sign us up. Trevor Sikkema, everybody, Pro Football Focus. We'll see you next week on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.